For any job you do, it's always important to have the right tools and the right materials to be successful. I'm going to show you my recommendations for having a successful beading outcome when you bead on fabric. Probably the most important tool that you need will be glasses if you need them for close work or for hand work, because we're going to be working with very fine needles and very small beads, and you need to see the holes in the beads to be successful. About the quality of beads. There are no glass bead factories in the United States, so the beads have to be imported from either Japan or the Czech Republic. When they are imported into this country, beads that are made in Japan are shipped in half-kilo bags. Every bead in the bag is the same color and size. The bead shop or retail store then has to repackage them for sale. If you see beads that are on pre-strung hanks, that means these beads were made in the Czech Republic. There are differences between the two types of beads. Japanese beads tend to have larger holes and run more regular in size. That's important because most of the beading techniques I use, I'm going to use a double thread in my needle and go through the tiny hole in that bead 1, 2, 3, or maybe even 4 times. And if the hole is not large enough to do that, as you pass through the needle, the bead will explode on your project. So, if you have a choice, I recommend Japanese seed beads. The type of needle I recommend is a size 12 sharps. Sharps is a code word for a short needle. Size 12 beading needles also come in a longer needle. I prefer the shorter ones. As I mentioned, these needles are very fine. The only needle threader I have found that works well with the tiny eye of that size 12 sharps is this particular needle threader. And it does say on it, precision threader for fine needles. That's what you need to make sure of when you see packaging that looks like this. I also use a thread that sometimes can be difficult to find. It is called silicone thread. And silicone is sold both on cards and on small spools like this. You always match the thread color to the color of your bead, because even done correctly, most beading stitches there is a little bit of thread that shows around the bead. And you can camouflage that thread if the thread color is the same color or value of the beads you're using. Silicone is a nylon thread and the fibers are twisted, so it does not separate and fray as do some other beading threads when you're doing your beadwork. It's a strong thread. If you do not want to invest in all the colors of silicone, and there are about 20, you can start out with the basic neutrals. You would pick a light value thread such as this natural for light color beads, a medium value thread, this gray, for medium value beads, and for the dark beads I like the navy blue. There are only 2 types of beads that I do not use the silicone thread, and that would be beads that are either metal, because they usually have sharp edges inside the hole, or crystals. That's when I switch to Fireline. It does look like a monofilament line, but it actually is not. It's a tiny cable that's been coated with a plastic surface. And this is what I switched to for both the crystals and the metal beads. As far as bead surfaces go, if you try to bead on a hard surface, such as this hard plate, as you are putting the needle through the beads, that would be optimal. But if you're on a hard surface, sometimes you try to get the needle in the hole and the bead will slide away from you. For that reason, I recommend you bead off of a piece of Vellux. And Vellux does not have lint on it, but it is very soft. And as you put the needle into the hole of the bead, you can pick up that bead without it scooting away from you. When you are all done beading, people ask, how can I put my beads away in an efficient manner? I use what's called a Scoobies. Oftentimes you'll have a whole different bunch of colors and sizes of beads, and if you want to isolate the colors, like I'm doing now, I can pick up the beads and then go to my container and put the tip into my container, and all the beads will go back into it. One other important tool to have is a very small, sharp pair of scissors or embroidery scissors. That will give you the cleanest cut on your thread, on your silicone thread. A dressmaker shear will leave the thread frayed. The way that I work with beading on fabric is, before I start, I have my top fabric, and I either have a lightweight cotton fabric or flannel that I fuse with a lightweight fusible, or I will quilt baste. So when I start beading, I'm going to bead through the top of my quilt or project, and also the middle layer of it, which is the batting or the flannel. Technically, a quilt or an art quilt has 3 layers: the top, the batting, and the back. By beading through both the top and the batting layer at once, when I'm done with the beading, I can then go and fuse on the back my backing fabric. That way you do not see your thread knots and thread stitches from the beading on the back side of your quilt.